3. So I'm just going to see if anybody's joining me. Not entirely sure if I've done this right. So anyway, probably just going to go for it and hope for the best. As you can see, I am broadcasting live from my girlfriend's kitchen. We've all had to make sort of really significant changes to our lives, the way in which we work, the way in which we approach all sorts of different things in our lives due to the events that are going on. I've got a few notifications, see if that's anybody going to be joining us. No, let's put that on airplane mode. And obviously I'm no different. I'm set up here now to try and provide some advice, tips, techniques, guidance, whatever I can, using the things that I would normally use with clients to help them to overcome stress, anxiety, depression, other challenges that they have in their lives. So I've prepared a short presentation to run through with you, and I think this is going to be useful to give you kind of the background, the fundamentals of the things that I'm going to be talking about on our mental health support group page over the next coming weeks. So I'm going to run through that. It's essentially 3 parts to it. We've got a bit of background into psychology, about why some of the areas that, some of the reasons that the current situation is bringing up stress and anxiety, and perhaps to try and look at the background of the psychology behind that. I think that's going to be useful. Spend a few moments on that. Then we're going to look in at a type of therapy which is very useful as a kind of a coping strategy for all sorts of stress or anxiety or low mood. And my version and my take on that, and that's something called cognitive behavioural therapy. And within that, there's going to be a number of different ways that you can use and adapt and change to your own way of thinking to help you to manage any stresses or anxieties that you may be experiencing. And then finally, we're going to be looking at mindfulness and how we can combine cognitive behavioural therapy and some of the theories and techniques around that, and with mindfulness to hopefully get us to feel a bit more settled and a bit more content. So hopefully with a bit of luck and a fair wind, if I press some buttons now, I should be able to show you my screen and you should still be able to see me somewhere. Here we go. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was this. This is called the hierarchy of needs, or Maslow's hierarchy. And it was designed by a man called Maslow, I think in about the 60s. And what this says is that all human beings have these levels of need, from psychological safety, love and belonging, which is essentially our relationships, esteem, and something called self-actualization. Let's just look at these in a bit closer detail. Our physiological needs, these are our basic, almost survival requirements. Within that, we have our food, water, safety, shelter, warmth, clothes, all of those types of things. And then we have safety, and that is that feeling of being safe, sometimes expressed as the freedom from fear. That safety takes many different forms. We could think of it in terms of our home being a house with doors and windows that we could lock, or it could be safety in terms of the people that are near to us. We then have, just to spend a bit of time on the other levels for a moment or two, then we have our relationships that could be with our parents or our children, our significant other, our siblings, our close friends, our colleagues, our neighbours. Almost imagine as if they're like concentric circles of the people that we are closest to, and then sort of expanding out as those people become perhaps less close to us. If you think of human beings, we are essentially a tribal species. We thrive in relationships. We need to have relationships and quality relationships in order to thrives emotionally and psychologically. The next level up is esteem, sometimes called self-worth or self-respect. If we're thinking about how we perform in terms of our work or what we do, that's sometimes called self-efficacy. And it's also how other people view us and our value in the world. We all need to have that. And then finally, once we've got all four of these levels taken care of, we have this level up here called self-actualization, which is kind of knowing that our life has purpose and meaning, and knowing that we're kind of doing the things that we should be doing in order to fulfill our potential. We can't ever get to this stage fully unless we have all of these things broadly met. And the first thing that we need to consider is that we are ultimately in a very privileged, I suppose, position, is that through, I don't really want to use the word normal, but through the vast majority of our lives, the majority of our needs in these two lower areas have been met. We live in a Western economy. We have safety nets in terms of a health service and a welfare system and all that. And I promise I'm not going to get political in talking about those things. That's not what we're here to do. But we do have, by and large, these things taken care of for us. So the first point I kind of wanted to make was around, we are now experiencing, perhaps and hopefully for the first time in our lives, that where these things aren't as guaranteed and they're not as assured as we have always felt that they might be, that there are things out there in the world that do threaten our physiological safety and our physiological needs and safety. And that is desperately unsettling, because if we think about the impact that would have on those upper levels that we were looking at a moment or two ago, that is something that hopefully we'll never experience again, and we haven't experienced before. When we have a threat, be it internal or external, to these needs specifically, then because we are humans, because we are essentially creatures that are interested in our own survival, when these areas are threatened or there is a risk to them, then of course our brain is going to take us to a place of worrying, being fearful, being anxious about how we can get to a stage where these things are back in place or are protected. And that, first off, is one of the fundamental reasons why in the early stages of this thing, people were going out and panic buying. Whether that was because they'd misunderstood the situation, or that they felt that having these things in place would try and guarantee or provide a greater level of physiological safety to them, or not. It doesn't really matter, I suppose. What they were responding to is that deep-rooted need that we all have for having our physiological needs met and to have that feeling of safety. And perhaps those people haven't ever had an experience within their lives where those things were threatened at any level. Just as an aside, really, when I work with people with particularly anxiety, most of the anxieties that people that I work with will experience them in these two levels. Thinking about the challenges that they have in their relationships with other people, or their concerns or confusions, or with relationships with other people. Or it might be a general feeling of not being good enough, or not being worthy, or being unlovable or impossible to love. They are, in my experience of working with clients, two of the areas where people most experience some form of anxiety. And when we boost how we feel about ourselves, then that can have almost a reverse effect when we get down to the other levels of the hierarchy. When we feel better about ourselves, we are able to say the things that we want and need within our relationships, and we are better able and better positioned to attend to our needs in these other areas and to look after them for ourselves. I mention that just as an aside because I've got the thing in front of me. The other thing that I think can be going on in terms of our esteem and in terms of our relationships, it shouldn't be underestimated how much value many people put into, or how much weight that individuals put into their ability to provide for their family, or to be the source or the foundation of the family, and where things are, the ability to go to work or the ability to buy the things that they would ordinarily buy in shops is taken away and outside of their control. That can also have an impact on how somebody feels about themselves, about their ability to be the provider almost, I suppose. And let's not forget that we are now in a period of time where we are, for our own safety and protection and well-being, we are now limited in the space that we can move around in. We've all been asked, understandably so, to stay within the confines of our own home. And whilst that is with the people that are nearest and dearest to us, without having that space to move around, it may be that we start to get under each other's feet a little bit. And there may start to be a few little tensions or whatever else starting to creep in. So at every single level almost, what is going on challenges our basic human psychological and emotional and physical needs. And that isn't to be underestimated. I think it's really important that you just understand that a bit, that as human beings, we all have all of these needs. We all have different needs in each of those levels. We all put different weight on certain aspects within those levels. And because we're all different, the response that we have, the reactions to the events that we find, are going to be different. And when we see people behaving in ways that are different to how we react or how we respond, or people concerned about things that perhaps concern us less, then it can leave us feeling confused, or it can leave us feeling angry, or it can leave us feeling judgmental, or whatever else. When we are experiencing those thoughts and feelings about other people, how they've behaved or what they've done in terms of the things that they've bought, or they're going outside when they shouldn't be, whatever it may be, the only thing that is going to happen is that is going to cause us stress and anxiety or frustration or anger and ultimately distress. And when we experience distress, that is bad for us. Stress is bad for us in terms of our mental well-being, but it's also very bad for us in terms of our physical well-being. We need to be as free from stress as possible, because stress releases hormones into our body of cortisol and adrenaline, and they impact the effectiveness of our immune system. So keeping ourselves as stress-free as possible, or to manage the stress that we're under, is going to be really important, because we all at any time need our immune systems to be functioning at the very best level that they can be. So a bit of background there in terms of basic human psychological needs. And now I'm going to move on to something completely different. I'm going to talk about football. And if you're an existing client of mine, you would have seen me scribble out a version of this previously, but I think it's important just to have a bit of a reminder on it. So this is my version, my take, if you like, on this type of therapy that you may have heard of before, called cognitive behavioural therapy. I'm just going to have a sip of water there. Got to keep hydrated. Very important. So I know nothing about football. It's not really my bag at all. I know lots of people love it, and it's not really about football at all. We're going to use the outcome of a football match as an analogy. We're going to use the fact that when people go to a football match, if you are a supporter of the winning team, then that feels like you've gone to watch this football match and your team has won, and that this is a really great day. You're now singing and chanting, hugging your mates and all of that stuff. Or you could be a supporter of the losing team, and that also feels like that's impacted on how the rest of your day's gone. You're now really upset, you're having thoughts about your team isn't as good as it used to be, and that might have a negative effect on that person's behaviour. And I just use that in a kind of almost light-hearted way as an exaggerated example of what goes on when we see an event happen in the outside world and it feels like it's affected us and the way in which we behave. But of course, in this analogy, we've got two people standing at opposite ends of the stadium, having watched exactly the same thing, but their behavior and their outcome has been entirely different in terms of how they're feeling overall. Let me just click here and then we'll show you the next bit. So what is actually happening? First off, the information has gone in through our eyes and our ears and our senses, and our brain within nanoseconds has made an interpretation as to what that actually means. So our brain has allowed this information to run through all of the circuitry of our brain, and then we've decided if it is relevant to us. That relevancy determines the significance to us. I'm just going to move this out of the way. I don't know if it shows the same on your screen, but where I was, it was covering a bit up. The next stage, so if something is significant to us, then it will start to impact us in a different way. It means that it might create a meaning for us. So human beings are meaning makers. We learn things through stories and through analogies and through figurative language. And we feel like things mean stuff to us. In the analogy of the football match, for one person, their team has won, and this means that their team is performing well, and it gives them that buzz, that good feeling. It gives them that sense of positivity, of a positive outlook. For the person that their team has lost, this means that their team isn't as good as it once was, and you know, they were a dyed-in-the-wool football fan. They've been to all of these matches, and the outlook is really, really positive. And we create that meaning internally. If we get all of those three things kind of lined up, get those ducks in a row, if you like, then that can create an emotional response. Now, emotions are simply the way in which our physiology responds, those physical sensations that we get. We use phrases like up to my eyes in it, the weight of the world on my shoulders, heartache, gut feeling, all of those different types of physical metaphors for our emotions. And we use those phrases because we understand what they feel like. We know what the weight of the world on the shoulders feels like. We know what heartache feels like. So we've got 4 stages then. We've got the interpretation of the information coming into our brains. We've then got our brains determining if that is of relevance to us, and if it is, the significance that that has on our lives. And then if all of those 2 initial stages, those boxes are checked almost or ticked, then we create a meaning. If that meaning is significant, is substantial, then we have an emotional response to it. And it is that emotional response that determines our behavior. The human brain is very good at finding ways in order to get us out of a negative emotional state. That part of the human brain that is good at doing that is not interested about our long-term best interests or societal norms or things that are going to help us or keep us healthy in the long term. It is only interested in getting us out of that negative emotional state. If you think about the work that I would be doing with clients in a normal, to use that word, week, that might be around people looking to make changes to the food that they're eating, or to lose weight. It might be to stop smoking. It might be to reduce consumption of alcohol. It might be to find the motivation to exercise, whatever it might be. All of those things are, or the general trend that runs through all of that work that I do with people is people trying to change a behavior that they are using to change an emotional response. What people are aware of, and I'll use the example for weight management, is the emotional, is the behavior that they're undertaking, eating the foods that are not helping them to lose weight. But what they're perhaps not consciously aware of, what sort of sits behind their conscious awareness, is the emotional response that they're experiencing, that they're using food in order to change, to shift their emotional state. So what I do when I work with clients is to almost go back through those different levels to see what is going on in their life at that time, to help them to understand how they've got to a stage where they've developed this emotional response. This emotional response has come to the surface, for which they are then using, in that example, food to change their emotional state. For many people, oh, my arrow's gone a bit wonky there, I don't know why that is. For many people, the behavior pattern that they are running, that they have, is one of overthinking. And that is how anxiety is kind of born out. That's where it comes to the surface, where the behavior isn't using something external like food or drink or whatever it might be, where it is simply allowing those thoughts to run and run and run. And we call that, in therapy language, call that rumination. When those thoughts take hold, we embellish them, we amplify them, we magnify them, we paint them in glorious technicolor, and it feels to us like those things are actually happening right now. We're no longer responding to the event that's gone on in our life. We're responding to what we think the event is. We're responding to how we actually feel about something, rather than what is actually happening out there in the world. And the more that we do that, we reinforce the initial thought that we had, and we make ourselves feel much worse. Now, I'm not saying that we should just stop that negative thought pattern, because that's incredibly difficult to do. I'm going to show you in the next part of the presentation some steps that will help to alleviate that. You may have seen earlier this morning that I posted a guided meditation session, a visualization session on some of the specific anxieties that people might be experiencing right now. That's for you to have a listen to, whether you listen to it on YouTube or on, what's the other thing, SoundCloud. You just listen to that, practice it for 10 minutes a day. So let's think and look at something that might be causing us stress or anxiety. And this is an image that I'm sure we've all seen by now of supermarkets in a bit of disarray. Hopefully now there's been some changes and the way in which kind of the advice and the rules and the approach that people and supermarkets are taking, we're not going to see many more pictures like this, but it's something that I would imagine is very familiar to us over the last couple of weeks or so. When we see that image, for us all, we make an interpretation, and it may be that that interpretation is exactly the same, or it may be that it means, the interpretation is slightly different for us all in terms of what we're actually seeing. It might be that you pay more attention to the fact that there are some empty shelves. It might be that you pay more attention to the fact that there is stuff on the floor. It might be that there's people in the background. We'll all have a different kind of bias as to what we pick up on from that picture. The significance to us individually will then be played out by our specific interpretation. And then the meaning that we attach to that is going to be ever so slightly different. When we see that image, it may be that our emotional response based on our interpretation and the meaning to us is one of frustration. It may be one of anger. It may be one of sadness of the state of the world. It may be something different. But if that emotional response is very significant, that is going to be driving us to behave in a way in order to change our emotional state. If we think about some of the actions that some people have taken in terms of panic buying, And we use this as kind of a model to try and lift the top of that person's head and understand what was going on for them in order for them to behave in that way. And we think about the kind of emotional response that that might have been in order to do that. I would imagine that we can assume that in many cases that is going to be a fear response, that that person was under a great deal of anxiety. And when we sort of lift the lid, peel that layers of that anxiety back, that person was actually pretty scared. And the part of the brain that would be in charge, if you like, of finding ways to alleviate that fear would have determined that the best course of action for that person at that time would be to go into the supermarket and to get whatever they could. Now, I don't know about you, but if somebody's acting in a way that they wouldn't normally act out of a fear response, then I find it harder to be frustrated or perhaps even angry with that person, because they have acted in a way because they were simply afraid. And that, for me, puts a different, almost complexion on it. That person has behaved in a way that they wouldn't ordinarily, simply because they were scared. Which helps me to sort of process the frustration or perhaps anger at people behaving in a way that isn't perhaps helpful to us as a wider society, because that frustration or perhaps even anger that I might have held at that other person doesn't change how that other person has behaved. All it did was create a load of stress in my system, which doesn't help me at all. Excuse me, as we move on to look at the mindfulness, we'll explore holding a non-judgmental attitude in a bit more detail. So that's kind of that section of the presentation on CBT. In the next section, we'll look at how we can bring that together with a bit of mindfulness stuff to help move on from any stress or anxiety that we're experiencing. I'm going to press a few buttons now to see if anybody's got any questions. Doesn't appear to be any. Although this is my first time of using this, so there could well be hundreds for all I know. Anyway, we continue. So this is the exercise then. So thinking of our, thinking of these four levels: the interpretation of significance, meaning, and emotional response, and then adding in the behavior that we undertake. The first thing to do, and I made reference to this earlier on in the week on our mental health support group, is to get specific. If there are things that are concerning you, there are things that are causing you stress, there are things that are bothering you, is to get them out of your head and get them onto paper, and to be as specific as you can. If we allow ourselves to worry about coronavirus as a whole entity, then there will be not a great deal that we can do in order to help that stress. Which specific elements of it are causing you concern? Is it to do with, and we can use that initial pyramid that we were thinking about to break that down even further. Is it to do with the changes that you've had to make to your work life? What are the specific concerns that you've had around that? So one for me, a concern which in my view of the world is legitimate. Now I'm presenting to you from my girlfriend's kitchen as opposed to my office or my therapy room at my home. And that isn't as ideal as I would like it to be. You know, we've got our cookbooks and chopping boards and all sorts of stuff behind me. I could have moved them, but I haven't. That isn't an ideal way for me to be working. I could expand that and think, I'm not seeing my face-to-face clients as in the way that I would normally. Is that going to change the work that I'm doing with them? So in terms of my work, which is very important to me, and in that upper esteem level, I've got some concerns and some anxieties there. If I think about the relationships section, from what I'm told, people that enjoy good physical health, and I include myself in that, very fortunate to have that. But I'm told that this illness is unlikely to affect me directly, although I don't know. That my concerns would then be around my older relatives that perhaps don't have as good physical health. Also thinking about what the future might hold, how this is going to change everything for everyone. So I've got three sort of main concerns about that. So when I look at my bit of paper as to my three concerns, I can start to analyze them, start to critique them, start to think about the quality of the thoughts that I'm having. So in terms of my work, what I can actually do is to do this, to do the best that I can do, and hopefully get some information out there that I hope will help people. And beyond that, there's not a great deal more that I can do. Once we realize that we've done everything that we can do in a certain aspect of our life, then we can kind of start the process of unburdening ourselves. Because if we can't do any more, we can't do any more. We've done as much as we possibly can do. In terms of the physical health of my relatives, I can check in with them. I can make sure that they've followed the advice. I can see if I can do anything to help. I'm in Southend, they're in Colchester. I'm limited as to what I can do. But the best that I can do is to do those things. And then once we get to that stage, those thoughts are still going to be there. And I have to kind of remind myself and be a little bit robust with myself as to say, well, I've done all that I can do. And then the final concern that I had about what the future holds, and this is true of any time, not just now, is that nobody knows what the future holds. The most important moment that we have is the moment that exists right now. I could easily think about what the position will be with my finances, the economy, people booking in to see me for sessions. I could spend all my time and all my energy in focusing on things that I have no control over and might never happen and probably will never happen. And again, it's that case of being a little bit focused, perhaps a little bit robust with ourselves, and to go, there is nothing I can do about that. The thought process is adding and bringing no value to me at this moment. So the exercise, coming back to that, is to get specific about the things that are actually concerning you and the things that are actually causing you stress. To write them down, to break it down into its individual component parts. There might be more things that are concerning you in terms of the food that you've got in the fridge, the amount of toilet roll you've got, the amount of Dettol you've got. I don't know what it might be. But to get those things out and put them on paper, that gives you the opportunity to look at them objectively, to step back from them. On the slide that I've got here, we're saying, is that thought useful or is it true? So some of them are going to be very useful, yeah. If you haven't got the things that you need in your home in terms of food or in terms of resources, in terms of loo roll, then there will be stuff that you need to do in order to change that. The one thing that will not help is worrying about it. So with things, with those practical, physical safety things, what are all of your options? The next point on the slide, what are all of your options in order to change your current position? What can you actually do? Some of those options that will come out of your mind, that will bubble up from that deep subconscious place, will be utterly unuseful and just won't help in any way. So as you get those thoughts, those ideas, get them down, get them onto a bit of paper, and then to look at the ones that are actually useful, look at the ones that you can actually do. And then once you've sort of boiled it all down, looked at the ones that will actually help, is then go and do them. If you're worried about something, if you're worried about a problem that can be solved with action, then you don't have a problem. Often with anxiety, because anxiety plays us a narrative, it plays a story in our minds that isn't true, we can get caught up into that narrative and end up not taking any action. when we could do. Now that action might be difficult, it might be challenging, we might not get the result that we want, but whilst we are taking action with something that we can, with a problem or a concern or a worry or a stress that has a practical element to it, then we know that we are progressing further towards it. The next part is about control. There are going to be challenges that some of us have that don't have a practical solution. There are going to be challenges that, or stresses or anxieties that we're experiencing that we cannot control. There are things that are beyond our control. It feels like we have a lot of control over the course of our lives. And one of the areas that people will be struggling with now is that some of the control that they felt that they had over their lives, it's now becoming apparent to them that they don't have that control. And realistically, that they never did. The things that we can control exist within arm's reach of us at any given point. And beyond that, we have a level of influence, but we don't have the control that we think we do. The areas of our life that we have control over are our thoughts, the things that we eat, the people we speak to, the way in which we look after our physical health, the way in which we look after our mental health, the decisions we make, the actions that we take. The things that we don't have any control over are what the government does, how much food there is in the shops, the amount of money that we earn, what other people do, what other people say, the way other people behave. We have an element of influence over those. But as those things get further away from us, or those people are less connected to us, we have an ever decreasing amount of influence over them. It feels like we have a lot more influence over things than we actually do. And this is a really key point in terms of looking at the things that we can do something about and thinking about the things that we have absolutely no control over. When we realize and we kind of accept, as difficult or as uncomfortable as it is, that there are some things that we have absolutely no control over, then we can kind of make peace with them. We can say, well, I've done as much as I can do in respect of that. I can do no more. I'll have to accept it. It's a very powerful therapeutic tool or outcome to get to a stage of complete acceptance. And to get to a stage of accepting things or circumstances or people for the way that they are, rather than how we would like them to be. I often find myself saying to my clients when they say about the times in their life where people have behaved in a way that has been detrimental to them, where they've wanted that person to have treated them differently or for events to have played out in a different way, is that desire, that wish almost for circumstances or people to have been different than they actually are is, to my mind, one of the fastest routes to unhappiness that exists. When we can get to a stage of absolute acceptance of this is where we are, these are the things that I can do, and beyond the things that I can do, I have little or no control, then we can get to a stage where we are more at ease with it. That doesn't mean we have to like it, but it means that we are bringing the things that are within our control back to us and drawing a line, if you like, between the things that we can control and the things that we can't. The things that we can influence, and we should certainly influence those as much as we possibly can do in order to get a better outcome for ourselves. But once we've done as much influencing as we possibly can, then we have to bring it back to a stage where I've done as much as I possibly can, and now I just have to sit and ride it out. And just as a final point on that slide, yeah, we have the amount we can control, the amount that we can influence, and then we have this great, huge amount of stuff that is everything else that we have no influence over. When we talk about mental health, I could probably talk for an hour on this topic without taking a breath on its own. We think about the thoughts that someone is having, and what I think is a massive piece that is missing in the conversation about mental health is that it isn't just thinking, it's how we feel. If somebody's ever experienced anxiety, anxiety is a very physical experience. Lots of people have digestive problems. They have tight chest, racing heart rate, heart palpitations, they get headaches. They can have loss of appetite or increased appetite. People that experience depression feel that weight or that sadness, or feel like they're living in a fog or in a cloud, and they feel like they can't get out of bed any morning. And that is a really physical experience. When we look at the practical stuff, the what to do about the things I'm thinking, that can have a really positive effect on how we are feeling overall. That doesn't mean that we're not still going to have some feelings of being anxious or being angry or being sad or feeling confused or overwhelmed or restricted or isolated, whatever those feelings might be. Once we've done that earlier part of the exercise where we've drilled down, we've teased out the things that we are specifically concerned about, we can then start to look at how those things actually make us feel. And we can tell the difference between a feeling and a stressful thought or an anxious thought, because a feeling is just one word. It will be anxious or angry or sad or depressed or lonely or something that summarizes that physical experience up in one word or two words. Whereas the narrative, the story that is going on in terms of what has gotten us to that stage of having that feeling will be all of the he said, she said, this person did that in this supermarket, all of the kind of the content, if you like. So we have all of the content, the story, the narrative, the what is going on, and then we've got the feeling. And those things they run concurrently, but they can be dealt with separately. And again, this is the way that I approach this in my life. I posted a video that earlier on about feeling good when I woke up this morning, did some work, and then started to feel a bit rubbish, and then took myself off and started to use this stuff to work through how I was feeling. So when we can get to a stage of being able to name how we're feeling, then that's when we can do something about that emotional state that we find ourselves in. When we can get to a stage of being able to name it as being anxious or angry or sad or whatever else, that's when you can use that meditation session that I sent you through earlier. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking through that now. If we're feeling any of those heightened emotions, whether it's feeling sad or depressed or anxious or stressed or whatever else, if we can acknowledge that feeling exists within the body, because those emotional responses are the body's way of physiologically changing to prepare for a difficult situation, then it gives us a fighting chance of being able to do something about it. And in mindfulness, the way in which you do that is simply by being aware of how you're feeling, by using something like that CBT style exercise to figure out the things that are worrying you, to compartmentalize it almost. And then to be able to get to a stage where you're able to name the feeling and to identify that you're feeling that way. So the first stage is awareness. Being able to know that is the way that you're feeling. The second stage, the second stage of that, as I put on an earlier post, is accepting that is the way that you feel. That not every day, not every moment, you're going to feel joyously happy, and it's okay to feel stressed or depressed or anxious or whatever else. And then the final stage is accepting that you feel that way and doing something about it. And the doing something about it in this case is using something like the mindfulness, or looking at ways that you can positively change your state. That might be distracting yourself. It might be to do some exercise if you're able to do that. It might be to take yourself out for a walk. It might be to do something different, do something positive, something creative. And to remind yourself that of these three things of what I've put on the screen just now, that mindfulness has three underlying principles, underlying pillars, if you like. That being aware, understanding what we're thinking and feeling at any given point, living in the present moment. Our minds want to take us off into the future or into the past, to revisit previous experiences or to imagine experiences that haven't yet happened. And then also to hold a non-judgmental attitude. I'll come on to judgmental attitude in a moment too. So awareness, breaking it down again into three different component parts. Ask yourself, what are you actually feeling? What are you actually thinking, and what is going on for you right now? Tuning in to how you are actually thinking. Living in the present moment. Sometimes people call this grounding. Is if you find yourself becoming anxious or stressed, is to think about the things that exist purely within arm's reach or within the room that you're in. I would imagine that if you're watching this, you're probably at home in surroundings that are very familiar to you, a place that under normal, again to use that phrase, is your place of comfort, a place of safety, a place where you are with your loved ones, or a place that you can just come and be at the end of the day. That is where you are right now. So find yourself in a place within your home that you find comforting, reassuring. Do something within that space in that moment that brings you that bit of comfort or reassurance or reminder and safety, and to challenge, I suppose, those thoughts that you're having where you're time traveling off in the privacy of your own mind into a version of the future that hasn't yet happened. And then the final point about holding a non-judgmental attitude, which is a third pillar of mindfulness, is to remember that holding a judgmental attitude doesn't help us. It makes us stressed and it changes nothing. We can be right as much as we like and still the world not be the way that we want it to be. We can say that that person shouldn't behave in that way, that we wouldn't behave in that way, that this could be bad for everyone, etc., etc. We can find when we're using judgmental language, because we use the word should or could or would or normal, those words may be absolutely true. They may be absolutely right and relevant to the situation, but to use them very, very sparingly, because it would be an indicator of holding a judgment against someone else. We know very little about people beyond our closest friends and family, and we don't know the stresses or pressures that they're under, and that take people down a path to behave in a certain way. So the way that we can help ourselves in terms of our own mental and emotional well-being is to be as non-judgmental as possible. The second part of holding a non-judgmental attitude is to do our very best to not hold a judgmental attitude of ourselves. It's very easy for us to say that we should and we could and do all of these different things. And whenever we talk about ourselves in that language, it can create a negative feeling about ourselves, which again is just really not helpful, really, in fact, unhelpful. Is there anything else I can tell you about judgmental attitude? Yeah, the final thing about holding a judgmental attitude is, a non-judgmental attitude, sorry, is that This does not mean that we allow people to treat us badly, or to allow ourselves to be treated with indifference or in a way that isn't respectful or kind or whatever else. It means with those people, we should hold ourselves in sufficient, I said should, we can hold ourselves within with sufficient regard and esteem, that we can establish clear and mindful boundaries with the people that are nearest to us, that we can develop our sense of esteem, that we can communicate our needs and our wants in that really calm and assured way. That is an area that is something I work on a lot with my clients on a one-to-one basis, to have the confidence and the assuredness in order to communicate our wants and needs and aspirations and desires really calmly, really clearly and concisely, because we all are deserving and worthy of having those needs met and attended to, and to do that for ourselves. Yeah, so there you go. A bit about mindfulness, CBT, non-judgmental attitudes. Let's see if I've got anything else. That's about all I've got for you for today. I was going to do a mindfulness meditation session live with you. I've done those before, and I think they do work better for when they're recorded. So I recorded that for you first thing this morning. That's now on the mental health support group page on Facebook, and you can find links to that on SoundCloud and on YouTube. I think that's one that session is something you'll be able to use every day. Find 10, I think it's about 15 minutes long. Find yourself 15 minutes where you can sit comfortably with headphones in and listen to that, and just follow the instructions as best you can. Your mind will kind of wander off from time to time. If you find that it does, just bring it back to the instructions in the session, and try and relax into it. Hopefully shift through any of the stress and anxiety that you might be experiencing in that moment. I'm going to press some buttons just to see if there's any questions. I don't know that there are. I don't really know what I'm looking at, if I'm entirely honest with you. So unless anything pops up in the next moment or two, I shall bring it to a close there. I'll hang around for a little while this afternoon if anybody wants to message me. If I've got any questions, and I'll edit this video down into sort of more bite-sized chunks and then post it up on YouTube so people can dip in and out of the bits that they need. So thank you very much for watching, and I will be updating more on that support group page in the days and weeks to come. So take care of yourselves, and I'll see you again soon.